Okay, so development can be sometimes thought of as a form of decision making. This sounds quite strange, but there's a thing called phenotype switching, which is basically many animals and some other organisms as well can actually change in the way that the developmental trajectory. So grasshoppers can change colour. I won't mention the other two, but grasshoppers can change colour. So if there's a fire in a particular region where these grasshoppers live, it changes a green world to a kind of dark, charred world. Um, Grasshoppers are usually green to be camouflaged against the green world, the vegetation. But when they shed their skins to grow, if there's been a fire, then when they shed their skins, their new colour is a dark brown or black colour to blend in with the environment. Now, this isn't the environment causing it, right? The environment is, if you like, triggering the change to produce camouflage. But so the environment triggers it, sets into in process a whole bunch of physiological changes and so on, which causes it to change colour. And this is something which evolved in order to protect the grasshopper from being preyed upon. So these kind of things look like environmental effects, but they require, if you like, innate machinery to do it. Other animals can't do this, but these grasshoppers can. So this is trying to look at the environment not necessarily as causing change directly in certain cases, but it could be that the environment is triggering evolutionary specified processes which change a particular developmental trajectory. So this is kind of what we're doing, sometimes called weather forecasting. Children may be taking a view on the way the world might be in the future based upon how the world is now, and are not consciously changing their developmental trajectory. Now we know about attachment, presumably. There were different versions of attachment theory. In the original theory, there were basically three. I'm just going to talk about the three basic ones. The secure attachment, in which the child has a normal temperament. They're capable of forming relationships, but they're not too clingy, but they do have relationships. Sometimes called insecure, anxious, ambivalent attachments. This is where children are very, very clingy towards different people. Usually initially the parents, so they can be very clingy and kind of sometimes quite aggressively clingy. And then insecure avoidant is where the child doesn't really seem to have any particular interest in relationships. They're a bit aloof, and it's believed to be caused by maternal sensitivity. So in the early ideas of this, Ainsworth thought that the more sensitive the mother was to the child, if the mother was not sensitive enough, then the child would become avoidant. If the mother was too sensitive, too kind of involved in the child will become clingy. And if the mother was just right, again, it's another one of these kind of Goldilocks ideas, then the child will be secure. The weird thing about this is if you add up all the different attachment styles, and depending on the study, it could say that at least as many as 40% of children are insecurely attached. And this is a lot if we consider insecure to be dysfunctional, and certainly when used the word insecure, it kind of implies that it's dysfunctional. So what's going on? The way that these are measured, there's a number of different ways in which measured. In adults, it's measured using the AAS, or the Adult Attachment Scale. And we can see there, the first one, I find it difficult to allow myself to depend on others. That's somebody who's aloof, somebody with the avoidant attachment style. The third one, I'm comfortable depending on others, is secure. I often worry that my partner does not really love me, is anxious. So this is kind of telling you what these three different things are. We know that avoidant people, adults, are more willing to engage in sex in the absence of an enduring relationships. They're more likely to have dated more than one person. They're more likely to experience a breakup of relationships. They kind of got fractious relationships, often quite promiscuous, and often not that concerned about love. Secure, supportive relationships. They're more likely to marry in the first place. Anxious, ambivalent, females admit to smothering their partner rather than engage in typical romantic relationships. People often obsess about their partner sleeping with somebody else and might end up stalking them on social media or following them about to make sure that they can trust them. So why have we got all these people who are avoidant or anxious, ambivalent? Could there be some genetic advantage to this, some evolutionary advantage? And it could be, because it possibly could be explained by a thing called life history theory. Basically, life history theory says that you, as an individual, spend your time doing particular things. Okay, so we spend a certain amount of time looking for mates, certain amount of time eating, certain amount of time sleeping, all that kind of stuff. The life history bit comes into it because it says that what you spend your time doing varies depending upon where you are in your life history. So babies will spend much more time sleeping than adults because it's important for sleeping to happen to enable proper brain development, right? So the babies spend most of their time, a large proportion of their time, sleeping because it's advantageous for them to do so. As we get older and become adults, then obviously we'll spend a certain amount of time looking for members of the opposite sex, having babies, and that kind of stuff. But in childhood, children need to be allocating their effort, according to life history theory, doing things which are going to help them to become successful adults. Right? Let's have a think of what that might be. Well, to help understand this, we can think about two different kinds of reproductive strategy. There are what are called R-selective strategies, where basically you have loads of offspring and invest little in each. So fish do that, most insects do that, trees do that. They have many, many babies, conker trees and sycamore seeds and all these kind of things. The K-selected, on the other hand, is the more like the mammalian strategy. You have few offspring and invest a lot in them. The key factor, depending on whether an animal adopts one or the other, or a plant even adopts one or the other, tends to be environmental risk. The riskier the environment, the more likely an animal is, evolutionarily speaking, to adopt the R-selected strategy. So some fish will have relatively large numbers of offspring, some will have relatively small numbers of offspring, and whether a fish has a species of fish is one of the R-selected, loads of offspring, or K-selected, depends on risk. If you live in a risky area, risky part of the sea, you like to get eaten, whatever, then the fish will tend to have this R-selected strategy. An environment which is much more risk-free, they'll tend to have more babies. The reason is because if a risky environment can lead to your babies dying, then you want to have lots of them, right? Whereas because if you only have 2 babies, both of them die, that's a waste. But if you have 20 babies and 18 of them die, you've still got some babies left. So that's basically the principle. And some people, a guy called James Chisholm, has said that, well, what we do here is that R-selected strategies maximize current reproductive success, right? Whereas K-selected strategies maximize future reproductive success. So this is sometimes called the CF continuum. It could be possible then that maybe we're talking about differences in R and K selected strategies across species. It could be possible that maybe risky environments lead to developmental trajectories in humans, which leads them to either have more children in a risky environment or fewer children in a relatively risk-free environment. So what we're doing when we're maximizing current reproductive success is to try and have as many kids as you can. Future reproductive success is plan for the future, have kids later, have fewer kids in the hope that the risk-free environment will allow those children to survive themselves to reproductive age. So some of the examples that have been used to measure this is how early does puberty develop, particularly in girls, how early does a child become interested in sex or have a first experience or pregnancy, and how many sexual partners do you have. So if you're maximizing current reproductive success, you'll mature earlier, have sex earlier, and have more sex with more people. If you're maximizing future reproductive success, you will develop later, you will have sex later, and you will tend to have fewer sexual partners, etc. So it could be here that what we're talking about is something which is going on in the attachment literature here. Now, there is some work on the anxious ambivalent attachment style, but it's not so strong as this, so I'm just going to focus on the avoidant attachment style. So secure children, the parental environment is signalling a risk-free environment. You're being looked after by your parents. Parents are investing in you. As far as you're concerned, unconsciously, everything's going to be okay. So the individual responds there by having few children and investing in each heavily. So having a small number of kids and, looking after them, talking to them, being nice to them, whatever. Insecure avoidance strategy maybe is caused by the environment being risky. So there's a possibility that the child is going to die fairly soon. So the response there is by having more children and investing in them less. We know from the non-human animal literature that baby rats that receive low maternal care mature earlier. We know that rhesus monkeys that receive low maternal care develop an early interest in babies, kind of as we were predicted there. Risky environments where you've got low maternal care leading you to want to maximize current reproductive success, have babies earlier. Nettle, Cole and Dickens in 2011, on a very large-scale study, found that early pregnancy, the factors which predicted early pregnancy were the individual being of low birth weight, the individual having a short duration of breastfeeding, the individual being separated from her mother in childhood, frequent family residential moves, and the lack of paternal involvement. Right? And that's the case when you control for socioeconomic status and the age of these individuals' parents. Okay, so all of these factors here are risk factors which signal lack of investment in the child, and the response here, according to theory, is that the child is responding by moving towards the more kind of R-selected strategy and having more kids at an early age, or having kids at an early age. Research by Belsky. Belsky was one of the people who came up with this kind of general idea. Children who are insecurely attached at 15 months are more likely to experience early onset of puberty. So here we've got early onset of puberty, again, maximizing current reproductive success as a result of as a response to a risky environment. Another study which measures maternal harshness. So maternal harshness is a questionnaire which their mothers fill in, which asks questions like, children should be seen and not heard. It's okay to beat a child if he's normal. That kind of poor treatment of children. So the harsher the mother is at 54 months, it predicts early. This is at the child at 36 months. Predicts early menarche. Menarche basically means the time at which the girl has her first period, and greater sexual risk taking in adolescence, and that's a link to the paper there. So, but all of this is suggesting that maternal harshness is something which signals risk, signals low investment in the child, and the child is responding by saying, okay, the possibility is I'm not going to be around that long, so I might as well have kids. Whereas if the environment and parental behaviour is signalling stability and investment, they say, well, I'm likely to be living a long time, therefore I'll hang on, have kids later, have fewer kids, and invest more in them. Okay, so to summarise, the nature of the environment determines to some extent the degree of innateness. Okay, humans seem to have some innateness and lots of learning. Okay, what that means is that there are some innate principles built into us, but there's a huge amount of learning. But those innate principles can also help guide learning, as we saw with children's ability to learn, babies' ability to learn about faces. Other species have less learning, okay, which is possibly one of the reasons why we have such a long, protracted childhood compared to other species. The environment matters, but which environment are we talking about? As I've said in previous lectures, it's not just necessarily the parental environment. Other environments matter too, the social environment, peer groups, and so on. But the important thing is that although the environment may affect us, it's not necessarily the environment itself which is pounding us into shape and leading us to behave in a particular way. Children unconsciously are often, the theory goes, using the current environment to predict what life is going to be like in the future. If the current environment is poor, then they make the prediction that the future environment is poor, and therefore will tend to adopt one of these strategies which maximizes current reproductive success, having a lot of kids earlier. If the environment is good in childhood, then it will predict that the future environment is good, so they will tend to have sex later, and even, and the surprising thing here is enter puberty later. Okay, that's the development. Thank you.